After 10 years since the last Godzilla film, Godzilla Final Wars, 4 years since the movie was announced, Godzilla 2014 has come to hit the cinemas, the epic comeback of the king of the monsters himself. It's been a while since I watched it, in a spectacular IMAX session, but couldn't post a review because of problems with my PC. In the meantime, however, I was able to form a more solid opinion on the movie and the experience itself, by reading other reviews and thinking and reflecting about it some more. First off, I think it's pretty reasonable to begin this review by giving some insights on the last movie to be called Godzilla, which was produced and launched outside Japan. Obviously, I'm talking about the 1998 Godzilla, directed by Roland Emmerich. If you have my Facebook, you probably know I mentioned I was going to talk about it after I saw Godzilla 2014, in my special retrospective around the 60 years of Godzilla. Anyway, when that movie was announced in the mid-90s, Godzilla fans were going through a tough break because of the 1999 movie called Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, which basically killed the character, showing that it was the end of Godzilla for everyone. For those people, hearing that an American rendition of the classic Japanese monster was in the making was an instant ecstasy of joy and rainbows. The expectations only grew higher as the release date came closer. People couldn't wait to see a monster like Godzilla, until then only portrayed by a guy in a rubber suit, to be rendered through sophisticated CGI techniques and a new dynamic, action-packed cinematographic style, especially with all the massive advertising following the months before the premiere. It even had a musical collaboration between the rapper Puff Daddy and Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin that became the theme song from the movie. It had everything to be awesome. But instead, what we got was way different. About the plot, it's nothing too much different from what you would expect in an American monster movie. A giant monster attacks the city, the military try to kill it, and there's some scientific element from the middle of all that. In fact, that's not much different from what a decent Japanese movie is either. But the main focus of why this movie failed is the creature they call Godzilla. I defend redesigning the character to look more realistic, and also using cutting-edge technology such as CG to help the process. This slim, agile, iguana-like monster is awesome, and the action scenes it appears in are also good. But is there anything there we can relate to Godzilla, the giant, indestructible, fire-breathing monster we're all familiar with? No, because this thing does not breathe fire or is indestructible, therefore it's not Godzilla. Okay, it might sound a little overreacting, but I wouldn't say this so easily if the movie had absorbed more elements from the old Japanese Godzilla movies, even if they were just references or Easter eggs, and used it in the story. But you see a more obvious approach to Spielberg's Jurassic Park series that were really famous back then than to Godzilla. It's like when Steven Sommers directed G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra in 2009 and filled it with action scenes and special effects that reminded a lot of Michael Bay's Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, also from 2009, just because everybody was in the Transformers craze that year. I don't want to extend here too much, so I'll just say, Emmerich's Godzilla is not necessarily bad. It's a reasonable, enjoyable monster flick. There's not much sense in bashing it because of the story or script, because monster movies, good ones sometimes, are generally made of cheesy stuff. There's no more reason to think this movie is more than a simple, mediocre piece of blockbuster, though. The only reason this movie failed massively is because it was called Godzilla, being that there is no trademark relatable to Godzilla or any Godzilla movie at all. The movie would have much more quality if it was an original monster movie, or even a remake of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Overall, this movie killed any hope of in the future Godzilla being adapted to Western audiences in a decent way, being that Emmerich and TriStar couldn't do the simple job of knowing about the character itself before making a movie about it. But yet again, why am I talking about this? Simple. This is the premise in which Warner Brothers and Legendary Pictures decided to take the helm and try again in giving the King of the Monsters a more proper treatment, officially announcing that they were going to do a live-action reboot of the Godzilla series targeted to Western audiences back in 2010. We could deduct that this movie was going to be more faithful to the character just because Legendary and Warner were involved. After all, we are talking about the same corporate partnership that brought Batman back to life in Chris Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy, with a lot more respect to the hero we saw in the comics. The deductions confirmed themselves after they announced who was going to direct the movie, Gareth Edwards. Well, Gareth Edwards is a young filmmaker who made his directorial debut with the small independent movie called Monsters, also in 2010. It's also the only movie on Edwards' filmography besides Godzilla 2014. I remember hearing about Monsters as well as its director through a small online community called Kaijiden, a group dedicated to giant monster movies. When I heard that he was going to make the legendary Godzilla, I didn't know how to react. A more experienced, well-known director would be fine, but it was obvious that Gareth had the heart of a true fan and knew how to handle Godzilla properly. Another important aspect about Gareth is that his stories have a huge focus on characters, as well as their conflicts, emotions, and relationships, something we see in Monsters and in the new Godzilla, which is the big center of this review, right? Let's begin. I won't talk much about the plot, being that I always end up giving spoilers. But I will begin by saying that Godzilla 2014 is definitely a Godzilla movie, something that the 1998 movie wasn't. We fans were afraid that the disaster might have repeated itself, and we were relieved it hadn't. It is also a nice first adaptation of Godzilla to the Western general public, in a style that gives an honest combination of the Japanese style with the American one. Of course, the American style is dominant, but the whole story of the movie resembles a classic Japanese monster movie from the 50s. The formula still involves the military trying to stop the monsters. Oh, by the way, Godzilla is not the only monster here. Some scientists giving the classic technical jibber-jabber and the protagonists being thrown in the middle of the chaos. It's nothing more of what you would expect in a monster movie, but it's the add-ons that make the difference. Gareth still gives a big focus on the character's drama. Actually, the whole beginning of the movie is centered around that factor, and the dynamic, action-packed Western movie-making style I mentioned earlier gives a big help. Also, not to mention, Ken Watanabe playing Dr. Serizawa, which is the most awesome thing of all, being that Dr. Serizawa is a character that appears in the original 1954 film. One thing I loved is the sound design that can only be enjoyed to the fullest if you watch the movie in IMAX. Godzilla's roar doesn't sound as good as in the old movies, but the sounds he makes when he's growling or swimming by are intense. The same happens with the sounds of the creatures he fights, called mutos. I found these creatures really cool, and a nice addition to the pantheon of monsters of the Godzilla franchise, even though their designs are obviously taken from the Cloverfield monster. The CGI delivers good moments, especially when the story moves to the graying, rainy landscape of San Francisco, near the part of the final battle. The photography in those shots is amazing, as well as the iconic Halo jump sequence.
I would not be asking any one of you to take this leap if I did not have complete faith in your ability to succeed.
That scene looks like some sort of surreal landscape painting that, alongside the haunting score, provide a chilling atmosphere. Oh, and about the soundtrack. It was composed by Alexandre Desplat, known for working in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows and The King's Speech, as well as other movies.
I always try to do movies that are different from the ones I've done before, and this movie is the perfect example. I've never done a monster movie before.
He did a great job, mixing the style elements from the usual Japanese monster movies and some more delicate sentimental rhythms to tone with the human element of the film. Although, you end up missing the good old Godzilla theme made by Akira Ifukube. However, the movie has its flaws. Fortunately, Godzilla's design is not one of them. He actually looks like Godzilla, even though he's kind of fatty according to some Japanese fans. Also, not to mention the elephant feet. But who cares? He has his atomic ray back, all in splendid CG goodness. But for such an awesome creature, he doesn't seem to appear much. His presence is teased throughout the film, which efficiently builds suspense up to the end. But you see the story revolve more about the human character's personal dilemmas and the military trying to stop the Muto creatures, which also consistently get more screen time than Godzilla. Also, for a movie that is centered around the symbol of the atomic power, the nuclear metaphor is presented in the beginning, but is terminated, without further development in the rest of the film. Except for a brief line from Ken Watanabe, he talks about the Hiroshima bombing. That line is brief, but it's powerful. Also, this script is kind of poor in some parts. I could mention perhaps the low character development or something, but there are also other things. Bryan Cranston's character is less relevant to the story as you would think, which is bad, because technically, he's the one who provides the best acting in the whole movie.
My wife died here! Something killed my wife! And I have a right to know!
But unfortunately, the story revolves more about Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. Many people who already watched the movie said that Bryan Cranston's character should have been the protagonist's. I agree with them. And I also agree with them that Aaron Taylor Johnson's character doesn't have enough to make people feel interested in his little journey. Not to mention the overabundance of characters that literally don't do anything but to talk things and never have any kind of relevance at all. I will be straightforward. There are a ton of ways to review this movie. Fans will most definitely love seeing their favorite character on the big screen for the first time after a long wait. General monster or sci-fi enthusiasts will not be puking as much rainbows, but will get out of the theater satisfied. Every other person might just give it different ratings, changing from "it was nice" to "dude, what a load of shit."
Actually, I should advise you not to watch this movie expecting to see something similar to Pacific Rim. And it is a waste of time trying to convince everyone that, oh, this movie is awesome, Godzilla rocks, #ShutUpHaters, and other fanboy mentalities. But it's really amazing what Warner, Legendary, and Gareth did. More than revitalize Godzilla, they created lots of new opportunities for future Godzilla movies and monster movies in general. It was already confirmed, only 3 days after the premiere, that Godzilla would get 2 more sequels, all directed by Gareth, once he finishes his Star Wars spin-off movie. Pacific Rim is also getting a sequel, directed by Guillermo del Toro and written by Zach Penn, which means it is a good time to be a monster fan. And if the flaws from this movie are righted out in the sequels, it is a nice time to become a fan of monster movies in general.